establishing central control and opening diagonals for piece development. Immediately relinquishing central pawn presence for wing activity offers a risky asymmetrical struggle. Fortifying the kingside, but this advance invites early queenside expansion from black. Developing the knight to its natural square now contests central influence and prepares for kingside castling. Developing the bishop to this diagonal prepares to pressure black's queenside and potentially support a kingside pawn storm. Solidifying the kingside, this pawn advance prepares for a fianchetto and potentially sacrifices immediate central control for long-term pawn structure solidity. Developing this knight reinforces the kingside structure and prepares for castling, aiming to secure white's monarch. Solidifying control of the long diagonal for the bishop creates a harmonious defensive setup, ready to support future pawn advances. Securing the monarch is paramount. The king now enjoys safety behind a solid pawn wall, enabling aggressive central play. Bringing the king to safety mirrors white's recent castling, reinforcing the central pawn structure's defense. Reinforcing the d4 pawn is a logical step, preparing to expand the queenside and gain more central influence. Solidifying the pawn chain, this move prepares to contest the central dark squares and reinforces the kingside structure. Developing the knight to d2 fortifies the e4 square and prepares for a potential e4 advance, aiming to gain central space. Clearing the h8 square offers the monarch a fresh vantage point for defensive maneuvers. Pondering the queenside now, preparing a potential pawn storm or simply restricting black's queenside development. Solidifying the center and preparing for central pawn advances, this move aims to prevent white's queenside expansion from becoming overwhelming. Unifying the rooks and preparing for potential central advances across the queenside, this is a thoughtful repositioning. Sensing an opportunity to control the queenside expanse, black shores up the structure, albeit at the cost of immediate pawn expansion. Consolidating the queenside pawn structure, white prepares for a potential queenside expansion while reinforcing the d4 pawn. Asserting central control opens lines and challenges white's pawn chain. Introducing a knight to a central outpost, threatening to disrupt black's pawn structure and gain crucial space. Developing the bishop to support the central pawn structure, and the queenside offers a sound positional basis. Recentralizing the knight allows for more flexibility, potentially rerouting to a more active square or preparing for a kingside pawn advance. Nurturing the knight to a more dynamic square, reinforcing the central pawn thrust and eyeing squares beyond the immediate conflict. Shifting the knight to d3 abandons the d4 pawn's defense, inviting a potential central pawn push and allowing black to seize initiative on the queenside. A bold attempt to occupy the central outpost and disrupt white's knight placement. A precise repositioning, preparing a kingside pawn storm by clearing the path for the queen. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure while preparing a queenside expansion. Repositioning the queen to c1 aims to activate it on the c-file while defending the b3 pawn, a subtle shift in the strategic focus. Positioning the rook on the open c-file now aims to activate it for potential pressure against white's queenside structure. Aiming to disrupt black's kingside defense, white initiates a crucial exchange that could simplify the position or create weaknesses. The rook anchors defensively, anticipating an assault on the kingside and preparing to challenge the light-squared bishop's influence. Sacrificing the bishop clears the h-file and exploits black's slightly misplaced knight, forcing a favorable pawn structure exchange. Reclaiming the rook solidifies the central pawn structure, though it grants white the bishop pair and a slight initiative. Opening the c-file now exploits the rook's absence from the critical d-file, potentially creating enduring pressure on black's position. A bold counterattack immediately challenges white's central grip and opens diagonals for black's bishops. Repositioning the knight opens a diagonal for the queen and reinforces the kingside pressure. Shifting the queen, this maneuver prepares for potential pawn advances on the queenside and aims to contest central squares. Opening the c-file now directly confronts the e4 knight, aiming to disrupt black's central foothold and create counterplay. Reclaiming the center with the bishop solidifies black's central presence and prepares for pawn advances. Preparing to swing the queen across to the kingside, eyeing potential mating threats on h7. Liberating the queenside pawn structure with this capture creates tactical possibilities and opens lines for your pieces. Challenging black's queenside control, this pawn push aims to pry open lines for white's attacking pieces. Challenging the center and simplifying opens tactical avenues, but leaves your king's diagonal somewhat exposed. Seizing the initiative, the queen now surveys an open central diagonal, posing immediate threats to black's king. A daring knight sortie, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and open lines for counterplay. Asserting control over the queenside chessboard's open files, this initiative aims to disrupt black's queenside structure. Focusing the queen here aims to disrupt white's pawn structure, potentially creating outposts or forcing a queen trade that simplifies the position. Exchanging queens simplifies things, giving white the initiative to exploit the open files and potentially a weakened kingside for black. Exchanging the bishop here simplifies the position, aiming to exploit the open files for black's rooks. Seizing the open file now provides a significant advantage. Embracing the endgame, this cautious move solidifies the pawn structure and prepares for queenside activation. Challenging the isolated pawn, white dares black to solidify their queenside pawns, a delicate positional dance. Reconnecting the bishop to the kingside provides crucial support and strengthens the pawn structure against the imminent material threat. Securing the open c-file now crystallizes the queenside advantage and prepares for future infiltration. A bold attempt to seize the open file, though it invites further exchanges that might favor white's better-placed pieces. Asserting control over the open file, with the rook forces black into a defensive posture. Grabbing a pawn here, black neglects the open c-file's danger, potentially sacrificing central control for material. Clearing the c-file opens aggressive possibilities on the queen side. Reclaiming the open file solidifies control, a vital step as material evenness beckons towards simpler structures. Materially evening up, this pawn sacrifice opens lines and aims to exploit white's now exposed king. Finally, recapturing the bishop restores material balance, though the rook now controls the open c-file. Initiating an endgame sequence, this king sortie aims to exploit the open file and black's disconnected pieces. A logical retreat, repositioning the monarch to a safer square away from the open file. Forking the king and rook seizes a decisive material advantage, dismantling black's defensive structure. A desperate attempt to re-establish a foothold, but the king's exposed position offers little solace now. Instantly seizing the initiative, this exchange clears a crucial diagonal and exposes black's weakened structure. Securing the king's safety becomes paramount, now that it's venturing into the open. Probing for pawn weaknesses, this is a desperate attempt to salvage something from a lost position by forcing activity. This king's retreat conserves his royal personage amidst the wreckage, seeking safer pastures as the material balance tilts unfavorably. The knight's sacrifice opens a critical file, forcing the black king into a precarious central position. King's desperate flight through the center now faces immediate peril. The white king's sudden foray to the center now dictates the pace, hunting down black's vulnerable monarch. A desperate flight, seeking shelter as the checkered board contracts, and the enemy king probes for weaknesses near your exposed monarch. Re-establishing outpost and pressuring weak pawns. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, aiming to disrupt white's centralized pieces and potentially gain an outpost. Reclaiming the pawn significantly simplifies the position and solidifies white's material advantage. Embracing the pawn fork, black attempts to disrupt white's now formidable knight, hoping to generate some counterplay in a difficult position. Capturing the pawn initiates a decisive endgame sequence, leveraging piece activity and the open lines. a desperate check aiming to disrupt the opponent's passed pawn advantage. Securing the king with this advance clears the path for an active rook and prepares for a decisive material push. Reinvigorating the knight's central presence aims to disrupt white's controlled pawn structure and potentially create attacking opportunities. Reclaiming the open file offers a solid foundation for white's remaining pieces to consolidate.